two caregivers, two podcasters, no rules podcast today. Joining me today is Marianne Sciucco. We are going to be talking about all things caregiving, podcasting for caregivers, and all kinds of different updates since the last time I talked to her, which was about 6 years ago. So stay tuned because you're going to get a lot of interesting stories and advice all in less than an hour. You're going to feel better just by tuning in. Welcome to Fading Memories, the podcast for caregivers of loved ones with dementia. I'm your host, Jennifer Fink. My mom had Alzheimer's for 20 years, and when I went looking for answers, I had to start a podcast to find them. Join me as we navigate the challenges of dementia caregiving together. Let's share our experiences, find solace, and discover the strength within us. Get ready to embark on a transformative caregiving journey with Fading Memories. Caregivers are always hearing they need to take care of themselves. Ha! Easier said than done, right? But I have a way you can give yourself a better night's sleep. You know how important sleep is to brain health, so let me introduce you to Cozy Earth bamboo sheets. I got a set for my birthday back in November, and let me tell you, I sleep cooler and better than I have in a long time. These sheets are super luxurious, just what I need after a busy day of doing all I can to support family caregivers. This Valentine's Day, wrap your loved one and yourself in the luxury you both deserve with Cozy Earth. Visit CozyEarth.com and use my exclusive 40% off code MEMORIES for a heck of a deal. Oh, and if you get a post-purchase survey, say you heard about Cozy Earth from Fading Memories, I'd appreciate it because nothing says I love you like Cozy Earth Comfort. Welcome, Marianne. What's the third book that I forgot?
Oh boy. Hi, Jen. Thanks so much for having me on the show again. This is great to get back together and catch up. The name of that third book is Christmas at Blue Hydrangeas,
Duh.
which is the prequel to Blue Hydrangeas, and it's really a lovely story. Again, on Cape Cod at Christmas time. So yeah, now I'm working on one called A Wedding at Blue Hydrangeas, which is the son's wedding of the couple that owns the bed and breakfast at Blue Hydrangeas. So
Awesome.
hopefully someday I'll publish that. It's just sitting on my hard drive. I don't know what I'm waiting for.
Well, I'm working on my own book. I should
Okay.
say that Marianne is also one of the founders of All's Authors. Regular listeners know that they are one of my absolute go-to resources. I completely forgot all my intro because I got hung up on that third book's title. And so I hope to be joining your ranks someday. But because my mom spent the last 3 years of her life in memory care, and a lot of people who have not experienced memory care have very negative opinions, I'm telling the story of mom and all of her friends and all of the mischief and mayhem that all these people got up into. Like the fact that my mom was one of 3 Dianes and they were all friends. That was confusing. I tell a lot of stories about the resident klepto. And then there's an aside, like, why do people with dementia, quote unquote, steal? So that's where I'm headed. I just need, another 10 or 15 hours a day.
That's all it takes.
Yes, maybe not having a 10-year-old golden retriever that requires my caregiving attention. She's very social and expects morning and afternoon social outings, shall we say.
Okay.
She doesn't care if I have things to do. She wants to she's laying on the couch, so I hesitate to say certain words out loud. She doesn't,
Okay.
she expects to go to the dog park. She likes to go shopping. She loves to go to Michael's or the Ace nearby. We have our hardware store boyfriend. He seeks her out whenever we walk in the door. So yeah, it's almost as much work sometimes as taking care of my mom.
That's funny.
It is funny. She's a character. So when you were on before, we talked about your book, Blue Hydrangeas, but there's one other thing besides being an author and a founder of All's Authors. You are also a podcast host for Untangling Alzheimer's. So, we have lots of similarities and lots of stories to tell. So, why don't we start with your caregiving story so the people who um, I have rebroadcast Marianne's episode, so that did come out this year, 2024, in the summer. I will link that in the show notes so you can catch that one as well. So, how did you end up being a caregiver?
Well, I had the great fortune of being the oldest child and the only daughter, and I was always the boss, and I was good at that job. So, my mom's husband was the one who had dementia. My stepfather, and we had a kind of turbulent relationships, like a lot of people do with their step parent, because he was very possessive of my mother and jealous of anybody who she would spend time with or give attention to. Anyone that she loved. He liked to instigate trouble and make things difficult. So when he started exhibiting his symptoms back in 2015 or so, people would, I would notice little things getting escalating, and other people in the family and friends would mention to me, gee, he's just seems to be like not right. But we always thought he was just a jokester and a prankster, so we just thought he was just being himself. And he would be really hurtful. Like, yeah, he had this really great skill at like trying divining a person's weak spot and then drilling into it. He was really good at that. And he did a lot of that. And things just started to get a little crazy, and he was always sleeping. I would go visit them, and I lived 250 miles away.
Mm.
So I went every month, and I'd stay for 2, 3 days. And when I would visit in that last year or so of before he was diagnosed, he was sleeping all the time. I mean, he slept for 20 hours a day. He would only get up to eat. And then I'd hear him in the night that he'd be up watching TV and eating ice cream and things like that. But for the most part, he was just like not participating in life at all. And then I went this one time and saw him. As soon as I saw him when I opened the door, I was like, oh my God, what happened to him? He looked terrible. He was just hadn't had a haircut, hadn't shaved, wasn't dressed. He was in crappy clothes. He was just a mess, just totally disheveled. And that wasn't like him at all, because he was a person that was his whole life was raised to be well groomed, well dressed, very presentable. He took pride in that. He came from a very a wealthy, sophisticated family, and that's the way they were. So when I saw that, I said to my mother, what is happening? She said, can you help me? And I was like, okay, yeah, I kind of had an idea. I said, I will help you, but once we start on this road, we are not turning back. I said, I am not going to invest time and energy into this and then have, you decide you're going to roadblock it because you don't like the result. She's like, okay. I said, I think he has dementia. Oh no, she was all upset because her sister had Alzheimer's, so she was terrified of it.
Mm.
Terrified. She used to pray, please, God, please. She used to pray to the Blessed Mother, please, Mary, please don't give me Alzheimer's. She was terrified of it. But I was like, let's go and see, we'll find out. So that's how I became in charge of him, because the year before, I had taken them to a lawyer to make all of their legal documents, which was like the best thing I ever did. They had a power of attorney, the living will, the healthcare proxy, the last will and testament, all of that drawn up. And I was the one whose name appeared on all of these papers. Lucky me, because he had no family. He had nobody in his family was active in his life. So that was kind of sad. And I
Yeah.
never dreamed that anything like this would even happen. I figured my mother was 9 years older than him, so I figured what would happen is my mother would eventually die, and then we would worry about him. But no, he passed before she did. So we went through the whole workup. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do was take him to these appointments and everything.
Because he was
My
resistant?
mom, he was resistant. They were both resistant, really. He was a little resistant, but he would do what my mother said to do. You know, he had a little cognitive impairment because when he was born, 1936, he was premature and
Mm,
he had some brain damage, which left him with some speech problems and a low IQ. He had a low IQ. Okay. But he lived successfully his whole life. He worked and was self-supporting and self-sufficient. But he would do anything if my mother told him to do something. He did it. So what happened, my mom, in the middle of all of this workup, this started in like December 2015. In March 2016, she got into a really bad car accident with a friend. He did not wear his seatbelt.
ooh,
And when they crashed, he ended up landing on my mom and crushing her up against the door.
mm,
And she ended up with numerous broken bones on the right side of her body, her shoulder, her clavicle, several ribs.
oof.
And she was just, that was the beginning of the end for her. That's when her health, because up until then she was fine, started to spiral down. And so what happened was she needed care. And we called in a care agency to come, and they met Fred, my stepfather, and they said, we cannot bring our staff into this house if he's here, because he was so disruptive and insulting and
Mm.
just not nice. So that meant my mother couldn't have care, which really upset me a lot because she needed it. So what ended up happening was, long, long story, he ended up being admitted to a geriatric behavioral health unit in a hospital for 5 weeks and eventually placed into a nursing home where he lived for, I think, a year and a half, something like that, a year and a half. Yeah. So, I ended up being, long distance caregiver, which is a thing of itself. Sometimes people say, well, you're not a caregiver because, you were far away. No, I was involved in it every day. I was more involved in what was going on in their house than my brothers were that lived near her and
Mm.
could have gone in and out every day, did not. So I knew everything that was going on with them, and my mother's niece moved in with her. My mother was very, very close to her niece. She was 13 years older than I. And the two of them, it was like my mother was like her mother, and they had made a pact that if anything happened to my mother's husband, she would move in with my mom and they would be roommates and have fun. So that's what happened. He left, she comes in, but it wasn't that much fun because mom's health continued to decline. And then she became mom's caregiver, literal, like hands-on caregiver in the house. And so I was caring for Fred. He was at the home and she was taking care of mom. And then I was the one that was like coordinating everything. And, when you're caring for somebody, you're constantly interrupted with other people's concerns and phone calls and emails and text messages just all the time, whether it was her calling me, the nursing home calling, the home care agency calling. They were on hospice, so then we had them calling, and then we had agencies involved for providing the caregivers, and then they were calling, and then I was calling because I had to coordinate for the Medicaid, and I had to coordinate with the insurance, and I had to coordinate with all these doctors, and I had to buy all the supplies that went going into the house and keep a track of that, and we just had all this stuff going
Yeah,
on.
long distance can be just as full time as
Yeah.
hands on. Maybe
Yeah, and
more
every
so
time
because there's travel and stuff involved.
all the traveling and then like the upheavals when getting a call and having to drop everything and get on the road for 4 or 5 hours, drive over there, not knowing what I was going to expect, or she'd be in the hospital or whatever was happening. It was a really hard time. And then, when you have two people to care for at the same time too, um, it's it's really challenging. So, when he died, for example, my mother had broken her hip. Now that's after the accident, like a year or so later. So
Oh
now she
dear.
was laid up with that, and she went into the nursing home for 4 months, had rehab, came out, thank God. And then she was home, but she was failing to thrive. She was not doing well at all. She ended up hospitalized again. It was around Christmas time. She spent that last Christmas in the hospital.
Mm.
And then she got home. And January now, or in January, they decided she was on palliative care. They decided to put her on hospice. So it was on the weekend. And I was told they were going to come out on Sunday, and I had planned to go there. And they were going to call me on the weekend to let me know when they were coming. My stepfather, he was on hospice as well in the facility. So I'm out to dinner with friends, and I see a phone call pop up on my phone, hospice. So I'm like, oh, they must be calling to tell me when they're coming for my mom, what time. So I excuse myself and I take the call. It's not that hospice, it's his hospice. They're calling to tell me that he has passed. I was just like totally was not even thinking about him, period, let alone this news. So, it was just things like that that were constantly happening. I mean, I had them both in the same nursing home at the same time. That's where she went for her rehab, because that's where he was. And I just said, I want her there because it'll make life easier for everybody if they're, and then she could see him,
Yeah. So that
so
had to
she
have
could
been
see
a
him.
little bit of a benefit.
That was helpful. Yeah, that we were able to coordinate that because it would have been horrible. I mean, not that I wasn't the place I wanted. I looked at many, many, many places for them, which was ironic because my mother, when we said, okay, we need to find a nursing home, um, and she's like, well, I don't want him to go here. So she tells me the place. I said, okay, well, we'll find someplace else. Okay. So we try and find a place for him, but nobody would take him because of his behavioral problems. So finally, then the social worker calls and she's like, well, we're going to have to expand the search. We're going to start looking up, further north. Now we're getting 45 minutes, an hour away. My mother doesn't drive, never did. And I was like, man, that's not going to be good. So then they call and they say, well, we do have this one place that offered him a bed. And it's the place my mother just said she doesn't want.
Is that because it
So
was
I
bad or
said,
she assumed it was
well,
bad?
I said to her, I said, Mom, we have a bed offer for him to go to this place. Oh no. I said, well, what's going on over there? How come you don't like that place? And she says, well, I went there 10 years ago and it was terrible. I said, well, Ma, that was 10 years ago. Maybe things have changed. Maybe it's better now. We'll go see. So her niece and I, we went and we checked, and my daughter, we checked it out. I mean, it was just like your standard nursing home. No bells, no whistles. But every time, he went there, 10 minutes from her house. Every time I went there, he always looked well cared for and presentable. I didn't have any complaints. So that worked out well. So even
Yeah.
though she was dead set against that, because I always, I thought my mother was an assisted living candidate. And I think she would have done better with that than she did staying at home. But she wanted to stay in her own home. And so she had a way to stay in her home. And so my cousin stayed there and took care of her up until May of 2018. When was it? My mother died 2018. Yeah. And she couldn't stay anymore because she just couldn't bear the stress. She was an older woman. She was like in her 70s. She wasn't a kid. And the last straw, she sends me this email, and she was out of her mind, a text message early in the morning because they went to bed, and my mother wanted to stay in her recliner. She was comfortable. They had these two recliners that were side by side, his and hers. But my cousin was now in his. So she said to my mother, you can stay here, but don't get up. Don't get up. If you need anything, call me. Okay, okay. She didn't have dementia or anything. She was lucid. So she goes to bed. She says she gets up. I got up in the morning. Marianne, she's in the other chair.
Oh dear.
How did she get in the other chair? I had the chair in the reclined position. It was still reclined. She's like, oh my God, she got herself out of that chair. I don't know what she did. I
Yeah, so
don't know
that's
where
not
she went.
easy if
And
you're
went
physically
in the other
fit.
chair. I know. And now
Um,
she's in the other chair. I can't do this. I can't do this. anymore. I don't want to be responsible if something happens to her. She was beside herself. So I said, okay. Well, what ended up happening is she ended up going into a different place because by now her husband had died and she was on hospice and she was, they said, 1 to 2 weeks.
And it
So that was
was how
rough.
long?
That was in May,
How
right
long
around
did she
Mother's
live?
Day, till the end of August.
Oh dear
And
Lord.
she left that place. I brought my mom into a place on hospice with a 1 to 2 week life expectancy. And in 2 weeks' time, I ended up having her transferred into rehab. And she left the facility on July, right before the 4th of July, like July 1st. She was only there 2 months. They didn't even know what to do about it. Like, they didn't have any mechanism in place for, changing a patient from hospice care to rehab. So my brother and his girlfriend, my brother couldn't stand to see her there. And he didn't believe she needed to be there. So they would visit and she was a nurse and they would get my mother up and they made her walk because she wasn't walking. She was wheelchair bound when she left her house. They had her up and walking. And so the 2 weeks passed and she was doing great. So they said, we put her in rehab. My brother said, I'm taking my mother home. And they said, oh, no, you can't do that. He says, I'm taking her home on this day and you better have her ready. And he did. He brought her home and she lived in his house for like almost 2 months before she died. But I think that what really got to her is because it dawned, I think like she realized, like you told me with your mother before, that this was going to be her new reality. As nice as
Hmm.
they made it for her at their house, at his house, she knew she wasn't going to go home again. Her husband was gone. Her first husband, he was gone. She was, regressing more and more and more, like her world got smaller and smaller and smaller. And like she couldn't eat or drink anymore. She didn't get any enjoyment out of that. She was completely deaf. She couldn't participate in a lot of what was going on because of that. And I think that she just didn't want to live anymore, which is fine.
And how old was she?
91.
Oh yeah, that's a good run.
Yeah. I was thinking about her today. I'm like, even if she hadn't died then, she still wouldn't be living now, I don't believe.
Definitely not well. So in the
No,
midst
I
of
mean, she
all
was already
that,
bad.
yeah.
Mm,
So in the midst of all that, you became one of the founders of All's Authors, which will be
yeah,
10 years old in 2025. Holy bleep.
yes. It's unbelievable. We can't believe it. We never planned any of it. It was just an idea. It was supposed to be a 1 month project and we're
So
still
you're in the
here.
midst of caring for two people. You guys get this idea for a 1 month project. So tell us that story, because I'm not sure I've heard this one. I might have. It's just been a while.
Yeah, yeah. So I was trying to promote my book, had came out in 2013. And it's really hard to promote a book about Alzheimer's because nobody wants to talk about it, or at least as much then. Back then, things have really changed dramatically in the last 10 years. But I was in a writers group called Clean Indie Reads, and we all supported each other. We all wrote books that were considered clean, like clean fiction, no like overt sex, violence, blood, gore, swears, any of that. So we all supported each other by helping each other by sharing blogs and doing blog hosting for each other and sharing each other's stuff on social media and getting together and do group promos and things like that. So I was doing that for a while. And then one day it dawned on me, I said, I wonder if we could do this with people who have written books about Alzheimer's, dementia. I wonder if people would be interested in like this kind of a partnership. So I knew Jean Lee because she had written Alzheimer's Daughter and she had asked me to read it. And we had corresponded. We met on Twitter, corresponded a little bit, and I knew some other people. And I reached out to them and I said, do you guys want to work together on this 1 month promo for Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and we'll promote each other's books and do social media? And everybody was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. So she brought on Vicky Tapia, who wrote Somebody Stole My Iron, and these other two women that I had. And what happened was the three of us really bonded and we took the whole thing off. The other two people, not so much. They kind of like weren't really into it as we were. I'll put it that way. So at the end of the month, we had created this friendship and we decided to do it again in November, which is Caregiver Appreciation Month. And we did again. And then when the following year rolled around, like in May for Alzheimer's Awareness Month, I said, you guys want to do this again? And they said, yeah. And so I said, but this time, instead of like posting on our own blogs, why don't we start a blog? And we'll call it All's Authors. Well, we're going to have every week in June, we're going to have a blog post Monday to Friday, some author about their book. And they'll write essays for us about their books. Do you think we can get 20 people? I don't know. Let's see what happens. So we start this thing. Well, at the end of the month, we had the 20 people and we had more. So we said, well, what are we going to do now? Well, why don't we just keep it going until it runs out and then that'll be the end of it. We'll see what happens. And then here we are. Now it's been 10 years. We have over 400 authors. We have more than 400 books. We have the podcast. We have YouTube channel. We have virtual events. We have anthologies that we publish. We published a poetry anthology this year. We have a beautiful website. And we have a following, and we have lovely people like you and others and stars in the dementia world. So it really became a lot more than we ever envisioned. It's just, even now I just compiled all of our achievements for 2024 to send out a fundraising newsletter and put it all together. And everybody was like, oh my God, we
No
did
wonder we're
this.
tired.
Yeah, no wonder we're tired. We did all this. I'm like, yeah, we
Well,
did. And we
I
have
don't know how I
more to
stumbled
come.
on you. That's good. I don't know how I stumbled on you, but after my dad passed away, we were cleaning out their house. He had the 36-hour day.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people love that book.
Mm-hmm.
That was the most depressing book to read. It was definitely not the thing I needed to read when I was becoming responsible for my mom. There was another one about the unbreakable brains. That was more about brain health. And that was about it. And I remember going to the library because this is probably going to make a lot of people cringe. I read all my books digitally because I don't generally reread books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I went to the library to find books on Alzheimer's, and there weren't very many. So I don't know how I stumbled upon you guys. It might have been on Twitter, but you've been
Yep.
on the show before. Vicky has, Jean Lee has. I think I've done 5 of the 6 founders or 6 of the 7. I remember thinking they added one that wasn't in there originally. I'm gonna have to talk to her
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. We just added Christy Byrne Yates this year, joined our management team or the board of directors. She's my podcast partner. So she was working with us doing that. She helped run a book club we did with HFC a while back. So she's been hanging around and we got different people who come in and they do different things. They run different projects. And then when it's over, then they move on. So we've had a lot of people come through the team. Right now, there's like at least 10 of us. And then I have my interns. I work at a college, campus nurse, and I offer an internship to students in the new media program. And so right now I have like 4 of them. 2 of them are working for All's Authors. So
Nice.
that's how we get things done. Everybody's a volunteer. We have a very small budget. We can always use money. So if people are looking to make, donations, you can think of us. But yeah, it takes a lot to get to do what we do.
And you decided what in 2021 to add a podcast as well? Weren't you doing enough?
Yes, yes. The podcast was interesting because what happened was I had befriended Chris McClellan from the Whole
Mm,
Care Network.
yep. I
And
love Chris.
he was the one, yeah, he's a great guy. And he was like, you guys really need to do a podcast. I mean, it was just like a real no-brainer because we already had like hundreds of guests in the queue.
Yeah.
I don't look for guests. I mean, I don't have to.
When I go looking
So,
for guests, I go to your website.
yeah, we're like a speakers bureau now where I have people coming to me looking for speakers all the time. But he kept saying that. So we talked about it. We're like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But then who was going to do the podcast? Because nobody knew how to do it. And we were all older. Like I was one of the younger ones, and And everybody just kind of like was tired and didn't want to have to learn a whole new skill set. And I didn't either. Like I just wanted to coast. I was like in my late 50s. I'm like, yeah, I just want to coast here. I don't need to learn new skills. But Chris kept being persistent. And the more I thought about it, I was like, this just is something that we need to do. A, because we can. I mean, we got everything we need. And B, what we learned early on is that we had all these great books and everything, but caregivers don't have time to read.
Right.
It's a massive like conundrum. Like, okay, how are we going to get, the caregivers to at least learn about the books and learn something and maybe take something away that they can apply to their own situation and make their life better, and also help this author to maybe find a new reader, somebody to buy her book. And that's where the podcast really fit into that, because we knew that people could listen to the stories, just like you, while they're doing something else
Mm-hmm.
and get something out of it. And it's just like a win-win. So I finally bit the bullet and said, okay, I'll try to figure this thing out. And I had an intern that semester. Actually, he was our work study student, but he was in that program, the new media program. And I knew he had to do this practicum. It's required. It's a 45-hour practicum. And I said, do you need to do a practicum this semester? And he says, I do. And I said, well, I want to start a podcast. Do you want to help me? And he was like, yeah, that sounds great. So I had this college kid basically teach me the ropes on how to do the podcast and how to edit files and everything. It took me a year before the first episode came out. It took me a year. So here we are
Okay.
now. We had like 130 episodes. We put everything up on YouTube now. When we first started, it was just a podcast. And then like a year or so ago, I started putting up a blog post for every episode. Because it's like a lot of work,
It
you
is.
know? It's a lot of work. So I was kind of hesitant, but then I'm like, these episodes need to have their own place to live on the web, not just inside some podcast app. So
Yeah,
that's
even
how we started to do that.
20 some odd years later, podcasting's still kind of the Wild West, which I don't know, it seems like other industries, 20 years would be, like solidly like middle-aged for lack of a better term, not still trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah.
But
Well,
maybe
the
that's just,
technology
yeah,
is constantly changing, and the tools that are available now are just so great. Having Zoom and having, the all the
yep,
AI stuff is really helpful. You just
definitely.
feed the episode in to your whoever it is that you're using, and it spits out all your show notes and it spits out all this stuff, and it just gets it's a I don't use it like I don't just take it and post it. I use it as like a rough draft.
Yeah, it's good, but it's not quite that good yet.
No, it's not that good.
I
And
sometimes write my stuff and then ask the AI to like clean it up and make it more engaging and
yes, you
generally
can do that too.
a little shorter because I get a little wordy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That helps too.
Yeah,
And
I
then you
do
got to
that
take
too.
out the typical AI words like delve. Let's delve into this topic. It's like, oh, please. Nobody talks
Yeah.
like that. It's
Yeah, some
funny.
of the things they write, like when it comes to like dementia and stuff, it's sometimes pretty funny. So yeah, you put it in your own voice, but at least it's just like it gets you started.
Yeah.
Gets you started. And I
Either
like that
started or
part.
ended, but you got to do the middle.
Yeah, we gotta do all the stuff in the middle. So I do the audio piece and my partner does the video piece. That's how we split it up. So that's how, it works. So we made some decisions this year that were different, because before we were doing a book a week. We were doing 5 books a week for the
Ooh,
first month. And then we went to a weekly thing, and we did that for many years. And then when the podcast came along, we said, why don't we do every other week? Well, the first, we'll have a new author introduce their book by writing their blog post. And then the following week, we'll have an interview with somebody, and then another new author, and then a blog post. And we would alternate the weeks that way. Then a podcast. So we were like splitting it up back and forth. And then this year people were like, we're getting really tired And why don't we just do 12 books a year, a book a month? So we were doing like 48 books a year. Now we dropped it to 12. Went to that to like 26 to like 12. Now we're at 12 books. So it's much more exclusive to get your book there. And then we do that. And so when that author is introduced, they write their blog post like they always did, but we also do a podcast with the new author. So when they're launched, their launch includes the podcast, so they don't have to wait for that. So if you look on the website, you'll see the new author post that they have a podcast player on the top, so you can just click and start listening to their podcast right away. And then the other podcasts that we do at later in the month, because we do two now, we're doing two things a month. We do a book club with an organization called Aging and Amazing. And we bring in authors from the back from years past or whatever. And they get promotion because they're the book club book of the month. And we have an audience come, and it's basically a podcast interview, but with an audience. Because
Nice.
we record everything. And then that gets published as a podcast and video at the end of the month for the second piece. So every month we have two different things going out like that. And then occasionally, like we're doing it. We have one coming up next week. We have done 5. It'll be the 5th virtual event. So we bring in a panel of authors to talk on a different subject. So this year we did one on dementia and the arts, and it was like using art therapy to communicate and to work with people with dementia, which was really terrific. And we did one on caring for your wife with dementia. We published a poetry book earlier this year, and we did one on that, which was the launch of it included the poets who were in the book, and they read their poetry, and that was beautiful. If anybody likes poetry, then you really want to check that out. And what was the one? That's one that's coming up is called Caring for Two Parents with Dementia at the Same Time.
I only had to do that briefly. My dad didn't technically have dementia. He was diabetic, and even his donated kidney was failing, and it poured enough toxins into his system that this was 2016. He thought it was 1998. So that was fun, but it was brief. So I don't really qualify for that panel, even though it was a definite yikes moment when I realized that his memory, and he was in the hospital for 32 days, and his personal nephrologist, kidney doctor, knew he did not want to go back on dialysis. And that was the first thing they did as soon as he lands in the hospital. They put him on dialysis, and they keep telling me, well, once we clear out the toxins, blah, 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 his memory should come back. That never happened. They finally kick him out, and she's telling me he's going to need to be picked up, driven to dementia, driven to dialysis, and sat with because he didn't comprehend what was going on, and then delivered back home. Now, my parents lived 20 miles away, so about a 30-minute drive. Dialysis can be about 3 hours. So you're looking at 4 hours a day, 3 days a week minimum. And I asked her, I said, so what the hell do you think I'm supposed to do with my business and my mother? Like, this is not just, I have nothing better to do but waste, 20 hours a week taking my dad to dialysis. She didn't really have an answer. And I said, but beyond that, and I was trying to put this very delicately because, I didn't want to upset. I didn't want to be one of those people that was giving doctors grief. She knew my dad didn't want to be on dialysis. She knew it hands down. She did not need to look at his chart. It was very clearly communicated to her. So I told her, if this is the kind of care that he's going to need, and we know he doesn't want to be on dialysis, I think we're in a really dark gray area of not honoring his advance directive. I said, I guess maybe we should call hospice. The next thing I knew, I heard click, dial tone. She hung up on me.
Wow.
To which point I was like, babe, I have a hybrid. Do not walk in front of my car because I will run over you. And then I will go, oopsies, what was that? And I will throw it in reverse and do it again. I was that angry. And I used to be like that when I was younger. I've very much mellowed with age. I got a birthday at the end of this week. I'll be 58. I don't know how the hell that
Mm.
happened. Yeah, I'm a lot more mellow with age. It's like there's certain things that aren't worth it. That probably would have been. I was like, I couldn't believe she just, it's like, I don't care what you think of me, but you've been treating my dad for years. What the heck? So, yeah, not all doctors
Wow.
like hospice. Thankfully, for
Hospice is a
better,
big moneymaker.
not for
Hospice
doctors
is a
though.
big moneymaker
Yeah.
as a business, and they're in the business, they own it.
Mm. Well, the one
Mm.
that we used for my dad is, well, they have a thrift store, so they must be not for profit or charity. I don't know. They did a great job, but my dad was
Oh,
home
you
from
know
the
what?
hospital. What?
I misspoke. It's not hospice. Dialysis is a
Oh,
big
yes.
moneymaker.
Yes, 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 yes.
I'm sorry. Dialysis. Hospice, no.
Somebody's making money with hospice, but it probably wasn't his nephrologist. But he was home for a week. He was a lot like your mom, was more comfortable in his recliner. And it was, their house was built in 1970, so there was probably a 4-inch step from the
Mm-hmm.
sunken living room to the hallway that took him down to the bathroom, and he tripped. And of course, he was much bigger than the caregiver, so she tried to prevent it. He ended up, smacking his head open. I told the hospice staff to take him to a different hospital. So it was actually a different health system. Man, those in hospital nephrologists were way better. Because when I said, he doesn't want to be on dialysis, they're like, okay, we can call hospice. And I was like, oh, thank God. I thought I was going to have to, I'm like, I was geared up for battle. So, yes, that was my short period of dealing with two parents with no brains. That was enough. Like, we're talking 3 months, December, January, February. Yeah, about 3 months. So like I said, I don't qualify for that panel, but I will for a future one, I'm sure.
Yes, yes. We'll have to work on that.
Yeah. So you were a novelist, and you took care of your mom and your stepdad, and you started All's Authors all at the same time. Good Lord. But now you're on to your fourth book. I think you mentioned that at the start of this. Is that just kind of
Yeah.
cooking in the back of your brain, or are you actually
No,
working
it's
on it?
actually written and ready to
Oh,
go. I've been, it's funny. I've been like, so in 2018, December, after my mom died, I started to write this book, this wedding at Blue Hydrangeas. And it's the story of a wedding, but it's told from the mother of the groom's point of view.
she's the
Okay.
one with Alzheimer's.
Yes, she's the one who has Alzheimer's. This is like 20 years before Alzheimer's. So
Wow.
I started writing it. I made a lot of progress quickly. And then in March of 19, my daughter got engaged. So I put the book aside so that I could create a real wedding. So we had that. And then I just kept working on it and working on it. And then we had COVID and everything. And and then my brother died. So then I had to, my brother that took care of my mom, he was in an accident,
Mm.
unexpectedly passed away. So I became his administrator of his estate. So that became like all consuming. I don't recommend it to anybody. Don't ever want to, people think, people were jealous that I had this job. They had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, it's not fun.
No. And so then that story was not going anywhere. So finally, I think I managed to finish it. But the funny thing about it is that I always felt funny about it because it's a book about a wedding, but we never really see the bride. She's not a main character. So I'm kind of like working that out, and people like she doesn't have to be. So recently, I got a review copy of my favorite author's new book coming out next February, Ann Tyler, called 3 Days in June, and it's also the story of a wedding, but it's not about the bride. And I was kind of like, okay, I got permission. I can publish this book.
Well, as a former wedding photographer, it's okay to focus on somebody other than the bride occasionally.
Yeah. But I'm just like everybody just expects it to be about, the bride and the groom, but they're like secondary characters to the story.
But that's kind of boring. I like different.
Hmm.
And I have to
Well, this
tell
is
you,
different.
yeah, well, that's I'm gonna have to do the Christmas at Blue Hydrangeas because I'm 99% certain I haven't read that one, and then I'll catch this one. But I have three hydrangea plants. Two of them are
Hmm.
blue because blue hydrangeas are
Nice.
my favorite.
Yes,
Although
me too.
the one on the porch had beautiful blooms on it. I was backing out of my garage and I went, what the heck happened to my, oh, the deer ate my
The
hydration.
deer. I know that happens to
So
me. I lost all mine.
I
I don't
caged
have
it
them
up.
anymore.
And so then they ate all the pansies.
Yeah, they eat
But those,
everything.
yeah, they certainly do. And they live in my yard. Like for a while,
Mm-hmm.
there were two bucks just chilling on the front grass. Like, hello, you pay the
Yeah.
mortgage. I live here.
Yeah. They're like pets.
Even the pet that I do have was like, are these people hanging out are these two hanging out forever? And they walk through the yard. We don't have any fencing, so they walk through the
Mm-hmm.
yard.
Yeah,
Sometimes
we got that
it's
too.
cold and rainy out, so the blinds are down. But normally, times I end up looking over because the deer get my attention.
Yes. Yeah, you see that flash of white when they run by. The white tail. We have the white tails.
We just have,
Yeah.
I think ours are all brown, but yeah, they're big and they come right up to like about 4 feet from the window is a fence. There's like a fenced in area under the deck, and that's for the doggy. And they come up to that. Sometimes I swear they're looking in the window like, hey, what's going on in there? it's, it's interesting. So what's coming up for you and All's Authors in 2025? Because I think this is going to come out the beginning of 2025. So what's happening this year?
Well, we are going, obviously, continuing with the podcast and continuing introducing one new author a month and doing our book club. So if you go on our website, you'll see that our schedule is already built out through June, which is like the first time we've ever accomplished that. It's amazing. But we
I'm
have the
I'm
book club
super
all planned out. We have all the new authors up to April in there. And starting on events. So we're doing one in February. It's called The Long Haul, when caregiving goes more than 10 years. So it's interviewing the guest panelists of people that have cared for 10 or 20 years for their parent. Yeah,
I don't
two
think
of them
there's
are
as
on our team, management team.
I don't think there's as many of us that were long haulers as many people might think. I'm trying to like I know one most of the caregivers I know it's like 5 to 10.
Mm.
And I was only 100% involved for 3 years. Marianne asked me if I could be on that panel, and then I got rejected because my dad did most of the care. So
Yeah.
a fair rejection. I'm super organized, and I don't even know what the hell I'm doing in June. So
Yeah, well, we just, we wanted to get that together for different reasons and we did. So we're going to continue with that. And then Jen and I talked about maybe doing something about podcasting for dementia and doing a panel discussion with some of the podcasters that we are associated with, our friends in podcast world. There's
yeah, there's a
several.
lot more of us than there were when I started back in 2018. I actually started at the end of 2017. Got the idea, researched it a little bit, and started recording at the start of 2017. And then my dad died, and started at the end of 2017 after my dad died. All those years blend together. The pre-COVID years get all scrambled up. And my first episode was May 1st, 2018. So it'll be 8 years this May. Whew, Lordy.
That's a long time.
I know. And I do one a week.
Yeah, one a week is a lot.
It
It's a lot.
is. And I shouldn't say this too loudly. I have it right now. During COVID, I got so far ahead. Literally, like I would be like, okay, we're recording in November with Marianne, excuse me, and your episode will come out in like March or April or May. It'd be like 6 months. I was like so far ahead, which worked great when we moved. But people would be like, episode, huh? What? It's like they totally had forgotten about me, which is totally
Mm-hmm.
understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I have it dialed in just right. Like I look at the like what's recorded, and it's like, oh my God, I don't have like this giant. Like, no, it's okay because like the stuff that's at the editors now is for like the end of December. That like I think one episode goes into January, so it's like about 2 months ahead, which is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it freaks me out because it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to go digging through the All's Authors again, find some new guests. And then somebody emails me and everything is fine. So I haven't had to tap, I've tapped you guys once since the beginning of 2020. I had people I had been talking to, and like February of 2020, got totally ghosted by both of them. One came back, then ghosted me again, and I was like, this is not good. I'm gonna have to find some guests, and I found the All's authors, or went back to you guys because I already knew about you by then, and contacted probably half a dozen authors. Now we're talking the beginning of March, and next thing I know, poof, my whole schedule was full.
There you go. See, that's why we exist.
Yep, and it's always
Filling a
fun.
need. We're filling
Yep,
a need on many, many levels.
we just need to get more people involved, listening, reading. So you guys got to
Learning.
share this episode, talk about, go visit All's authors, check out their books and their podcast, because there's just so much information that I always tell people. I got one a week, one episode a week. There's Love Conquers Alls, there's you guys, like there's still more room
Mm-hmm.
for other people,
Yeah.
other podcasts to listen to, because the more information you get, the better.
Well, that's the whole thing. You really, like I always say, people need to know everything on day one, and they don't know anything.
Yeah.
Once they get that diagnosis, people are usually blindsided because it's not something they've ever encountered or thought of, and suddenly it's thrust upon them, and they need to start making plans. And I mean, there are skills involved in dementia care. You don't inherently know what to do with people with dementia like you do with maybe children or something. You can't rely on that.
And it's kind of counterintuitive.
Hmm.
Do you think as the population continues aging, I just mentioned some of us are aging a little more this week, um, that more people will know somebody who's had it, and so maybe it won't be quite as blindsiding, or you think that we don't learn like that?
I hope so. I mean, I know it's much more talked about now, like there's less stigma attached, and there's a lot of books out there now, and I mean, way so many more than when I was researching for my book, and they were like a handful. And I mean mainly like books written from personal experience, not the caregiver guide that the doctor wrote or the psychiatrist wrote, but the book that the daughter wrote. And those I think are really valuable because people can identify with and follow the story. It's like a story of a family or couple or whatever. And I think that's really helpful in people getting out to support groups and all this online stuff that goes on. And the podcasts too are like really valuable and important. So I think people are learning more, but there are still many, many people who don't even want to reveal to their social situation or even their own family that they have the diagnosis. We still have that.
Yeah.
And
I
then
wonder how
people
long.
realize after a year or two, why are we keeping this a secret? I mean, nobody's helping us
Yeah,
because they
I
don't know.
facilitate a support group, and a person came in. Mine's virtual, and this person came in, and their parent, trying to keep this super anonymous, was very well known in their community. It's a smaller
Huh?
community,
Mm-hmm.
and pretty well to do. So kind of, you
Mm-hmm.
could kind of draw your own conclusions. Small community, well to do, and absolutely refused to allow anybody to say anything about their diagnosis. And they didn't know how to handle it, and people were starting to ask. And
Mm-hmm.
I basically said, at some point, I think it's more disrespectful to try to hide it, because then people are wondering, what the heck? I don't want to deal with them. They're
Right.
lost their marbles. I don't want to deal with this. But if they understand, yes, it's terrible, but if they understand, they might, be willing to help, and they'll be more
Right.
understanding. And it's just like, surprisingly, that person only showed up to one meeting. So I guess they didn't like my advice.
Yeah. Well, people, I think if they don't know, they tend to think the worst,
Mm-hmm.
and then the reality is not nearly, as extreme as what they were envisioning or talking about. And to say, well, they have a brain disease and it's called Alzheimer's and it means this and this is what we're dealing with. And usually I think in a lot of cases, when somebody hears that, they say, oh, yeah, my mother had that. Or, oh, yeah, I have an aunt or an uncle or grandparent or somebody I know had that. And there are so many people, especially in All's authors and you too, but people who the whole experience just completely changes their lives and they end up becoming advocates and speakers and authors and starting up businesses and,
Yeah, I have a phrase for
because
that. It's caregiver turned creator.
yes, yes, it's a huge phenomenon. So many
I
people.
think it's really interesting because it's like, I've talked to people who've created apps and written books and done
Hmm.
plays. And what else? What else is there?
Podcasts,
Yeah, podcasts. I've talked to podcasters.
blogs,
Mm-hmm. So it's
speaking,
like, mm-hmm.
yeah,
I've,
courses.
yeah,
There's a
just
lot.
yeah. And it's like,
Programming,
you want to think, well, okay, I'm done with this chapter of my life. I'm running away from it, but
right? People do
um,
that too.
I'm the Alzheimer's person in our community, and I go to the dog park and deal with it. So it's like, okay,
Right. Yeah, it gets
sigh.
a little too, yeah, it gets a little too much. But I think that people, because they have developed such this volume of knowledge that they don't want it to die with them. It
That's
took
fair.
years. It takes years to get that. And now a lot of people, especially in our organization, will say, I just wanted to help somebody. If I could just help one other person by sharing what I know, then it will have been worth it. It will
Well,
be
that's what
worth
you
it.
and I do. We share our
That's what we
knowledge
do. Yes, we do.
in all sorts of forms. So this has been fantastic.
I'm so
The
glad you had me back.
Me too. I was on Untangling Alzheimer's December of 21. I think she looked it up.
Yes.
All's author's website will definitely be in the show notes. You guys know that. I'll link all Marianne's books, and then the All's author's website has the podcast, so you can go there and pretty much get everything. So make sure you
Yep.
check that out. I'm sure I've seen the new website, but it's like I don't
It's
remember the
pretty.
old one.
The old one was beautiful. We loved it. But our person who took care of that for us left to go to work to get a real job, and yeah, so we had to find somebody else. So we just redesigned the whole thing, and it came out beautiful.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate this. And like I said, if you guys have not read Blue Hydrangeas, do it because it really is a vacation for the mind. And I kind of think the character with Alzheimer's, while they're one of two main characters, I don't know, it just was a really good story. It wasn't sad or, it's like I read detective novels. She had Alzheimer's. These other books I read, they have detectives in them. It's kind of like along the same lines. That's how I felt about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's nice of you to say.
You're welcome.
Thanks again for listening. If you'd like more advice, a catch-up episode suggestion, or just a simple way to get a hold of me, please sign up for my email newsletter. Seriously, no spam, just a once-a-week extra dose of advice. You'll also get my latest podcast recommendation. Here's the trailer for one now.
Hello, this is Adrienne Berg, host of The Ageless Traveler, and I'm here to introduce you to The Ageless Traveler so you know what to expect each and every week as we post podcasts and blogs and hold live Facebook salons. We're all about fun, friendship, adventure, and contribution. No, we're not a typical traveler show. We do offer guidance and resources to ensure that you start to travel and never stop traveling. I'm a travel addict, as you can tell. I've been to 110 countries, and I don't mean to stop now. I meet people, though, who face barriers to starting to travel or continue to travel. The Ageless Traveler is designed to knock down those barriers to travel, like health issues or fear of travel or tight money, lack of time, loss of companions, and even travel burnout. And now I have a request just for you. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify or any other podcast disseminator that you use and review our show. You can find instructions on how to do that on our website, agelesstraveler.com, on the podcast page. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tell your friends about us. And ask any of the questions you want on our website contact page. Talk to us live. This is Adrienne Berg for the Ageless Traveler, here to make sure you never stop traveling.
And here's a taste of what you'll be getting next Tuesday.
Have to find something that resonates with you for exercise. Like my sister's a spin instructor, 24-hour fitness, she loves it. I went for like 20 minutes and I'm like, you're great at it, but I hate spin. Like I hate it. Like I've done swimming, but you have to find what you like, because then you're more likely to do it. And when my kids were young, I joined the Y or a gym where they had a daycare. So I'd put the kids in the daycare and I'd get my workout and we were all happy and we came home. But now since, everybody's out of the house, or mostly, I love to work out at home. I have the self-motivation. So then I don't have to travel to the gym. I don't have to pay a membership. I just plug in my DVD or drop down on the floor and start doing my yoga. It's, ages and stages.